I see Desiree's here.
And
Yeah.
everybody, I think we are live. So right in
Yeah,
time for a
we
couple
are
more
live.
to join us. So CK, you want to go
Yeah.
ahead and kick us off?
Yeah. So, Desiree, Jim, thanks for jumping in right on time. You guys, this is CK, and this is the final episode of Drinks in Quarantine. The show and the time and the concept will continue to exist, but the name is going to change. We're going to move away from the quarantine concept and embrace something a little bit more evergreen. But for this last show, I'm super excited to have a rock star lineup of guests and a rock star agenda of just insane topics to talk about. So, let's just get right into it. I'm going to pass it off to my co-host, Bran. Why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Stacy after that.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. It's Brand BTC. Like CK said, I can't imagine kind of a more crazy, hectic time, at least in recent memory. I mean, what a wild week, and really excited to kind of recap it and have a couple drinks with everybody.
Cool. Well, let's go to Stacy. Stacy, why don't you introduce yourself and tell people who you are?
Well, I have a present for everybody.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Stacy.
That's my money printer go brrr. So we've been happy with Jerome Powell speaking today. Every single word that came out of his mouth, Bitcoin marched higher and higher and doing exactly what we thought it would do. I present Keiser Report with Max Keiser. And I also do Orange Pill Podcast, which is just...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we just it's kind of, Brady's sort of concept of Renaissance 2.0. So we're looking at the whole, if this fiat system is collapsing, what comes next? And let's be ready for it. Let's build it. Obviously, Bitcoin's already there, but more than that, mindset, culture, economy, ideology, just philosophy, thinking, more positive ideas than this turd of a fiat system that's collapsing.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of the orange pill concept, and I love it when people get cosmic with, what happens after Bitcoin. And speaking of the dawn of the Bitcoin renaissance, let's jump over to Brady, the citizen Bitcoin himself.
It is the dawn of the Bitcoin renaissance. It's the dawn of this Bitcoin bull run, guys. This is crazy. I mean, this price action is crazy. I think it was it's up 10% today, 45% on the month. It's beginning. And I heard a tweet, or read a tweet from, who was it today? I think it was VJ. And he was like, look, you might be past the point where you can get a sizable position into Bitcoin without moving the price. Maybe Saylor was lucky to pick up all that Bitcoin. There was enough liquidity left. But I think there's a lot of hodlers out there right now, and numbers going up is going to make people hodl more. So the supply ain't there if you want to get a big position, and numbers just going to be going up. So, hey, if you're out there and you're listening and you're a CEO and you have a big corporate treasury and a giant ice cube melting, just dump it in. Just dump it in. DCA is not going to work with your big fiat position that you want to go in.
I love it. Always be selling, Brady. And let's next jump over to Jim. Jim, I've been diving into your 4-part series. We covered it on Bitcoin Magazine with the interview with Aaron Van Werdum earlier this week. Why don't you introduce yourself, what you do at Reason, and I guess maybe a little bit about what interests you about Bitcoin?
Sure. So my name is Jim Epstein, and I run Reason. I work for Reason Magazine, and I run our video and our podcasting operation at Reason. And I guess I kind of got obsessed with Bitcoin. I think it was 2013 that I started to started kind of take over all my free time and my interests and so forth. I don't remember exactly, but I think what interests me about Bitcoin is the same. I mean, I'm a libertarian. I work for a libertarian news organization. I've been I actually have been a libertarian for a long time because my father's a libertarian, and so I guess it was kind of after college that I started to read Austrian economics and get really interested in the field. So that was like 20 years ago. So, it took me a while to realize like how exciting Bitcoin was when it first came along. I remember actually I first heard about it on a podcast, an Econ Talk podcast that Gavin Andreessen was doing with Russ Roberts. This was really early. This was like 2011. And I remember I was washing the dishes, hearing about this weird thing. I was like, this is never going to work. This is ridiculous. So it took a couple of years, and I don't have a lot of time to do my own stories these days, but I do have the luxury of kind of having some big projects that I always have cooking in the background. So I just finally finished one that I've been working on for a long time, slowly collecting interviews with old cypherpunks, including Tim May, who actually died, sadly, in 2018, and I had recorded an interview with him not long before that. And I recently put together all those interviews into a 4-part documentary series and released them a reason. So I think that's it.
Fantastic work, man. Loved
Thank
it.
you.
You didn't know who Jim Epstein was. Now you do, and you need to check out the 4-part series. Seriously. All right, let's go to Des and then finish off the intros with Matt Odell.
Hey, awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me. I am Desiree. I am the VP of Business Operations at Lightning Labs. So we obviously work on a lot of stuff, but mostly making Bitcoin faster, cheaper, and easier to use. If you have literally been living under a rock this week, which I don't blame you if you have, I wish I was. But we had a huge release on Monday. We released Lightning Pool, which is a peer-to-peer marketplace where Lightning node operators can buy and sell access to liquidity. And it also actually opens up this whole new possibility for basically transforming Lightning liquidity into a tradable asset. So now you can kind of earn yield on your Bitcoin. So goodbye, DeFi. Here comes LiFi. I'm on that. Like, come and fight me. Like, I've had that type of week. Because people have not been enjoying my memes about that, which is fine. I also work on my kind of favorite Lightning use case is gaming. So I work on something called McGox, which is kind of a next-gen esports platform that is entirely built on Bitcoin and Lightning. So we feature a lot of games that have Lightning payments built in, and we also kind of feature this cool browser-based platform for breaking down like that fourth barrier between players and people who are streaming the game. So it's like a really cool event series. Definitely check that out, mintgox.com, if you have the time.
MintGox is awesome. It's every single month too. They stream like a big kind of gaming and prizes and all that good stuff. And I know you guys are rolling out some international stuff too for the international gaming and Lightning audience too. So you guys make sure to check out MintGox and make sure to check out everything that these guys are doing. And last but not least, Matt Odell, someone who's not short of lots of things and lots of projects.
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me. My name is Matt. I like Bitcoin. Feeling bullish. Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Cheers to that.
All right, I love that. Cheers to that. And with that, what's everyone drinking?
A margarita, real margarita, just Cointreau, tequila, and lime juice.
Nice. I got a fancy IPA. Apparently it's for the children, but I'm doing it.
Oh, Maddie's got the mixers going.
Oh, what's
I picked up this Talisker, good bottle of scotch. I'm drinking with Matt tonight and tomorrow. We're going to be on Swan Lounge, so I had to get a fresh bottle. This might be gone. This might be gone by the end of the show tomorrow.
Yeah, I have to get one for Swan tomorrow.
I'll be the pleb over here drinking Bud Light.
That's a good pop.
How much does everybody miss drinking in person? Like,
Oh my god.
I just want to go to a bar and live there for like 3 days.
I've been organizing beach meetups in San Francisco. So this Saturday we're doing another one. So I have been doing a little bit of Bitcoining and drinking in person, but of course very social distanced and respectful. Bran, I know you got the rules up on the screen there. I can't see them, but okay, no, I see them here now. So we have a couple of rules here, drinking rules, just to stimulate the conversation, make sure that the liquor is flowing. So I know we're all super excited about the mooning price of Bitcoin, but if you say the word price, or if you say 20K or all-time high, you owe us a drink. So I'm gonna drink to that, and hopefully we break that rule a lot today.
All right.
Bitcoin's price is hitting 20K and all-time highs. Let's go.
Oh.
Cheers.
Wait, does everybody have to drink or just the person who said it?
Just me.
Up to you, but yeah, just the person who said it, really. So guys, this episode is happening on the 5th of November. The 5th of November is a pretty famous date in history, a pretty notorious date in sticking it to the man. What does the 5th of November mean to you guys? Let's jump over to Stacy first. I know you have a very historical take on how you look at the world. What does the 5th of November mean to you?
So I lived in London for a long time. So it's Guy Fawkes Day. And it is, yeah, I mean, the actual story of Guy Fawkes is he was like a radical Catholic, part of a Catholic fringe group that tried to blow up the British Parliament and nearly succeeded. And now they have an annual bonfire where they burn various Catholic effigies on these big bonfires. I don't know if they do that, like, 20 years ago when I first moved there, they would burn like the Pope on a big bonfire. But I don't know if like this whole modern PC thing, you're allowed to do that. But they would like burn famous Catholics as well, like pretty well-known Catholics on these big bonfires. My family, half of my family's Catholic. So when I first arrived in London, I moved there like in September. And then there's this Guy Fawkes Day, which I didn't know about. And they were like, oh yeah, we burn a Catholic on these bonfires. And I was like,
That's hardcore, man.
I was like, that's pretty weird. It's like, you're just allowed to do that. And so obviously the film based on that comic is the anonymous mask has become synonymous with, especially around the time of the origin of Bitcoin. That was a really big movement back then during the whole Occupy Wall Street, and Anonymous were all like stalking the internet world, and then they disappeared. A lot of all those anonymous people and Occupy Wall Street just evaporated overnight. But yeah, so it kind of goes back to that time for me in my mind of when the whole financial system started to fall apart, and that it was kind of like a global online meeting of all these people around the world meeting online around these the corrupt financial system.
Who wants to jump in? Who else has a take on November 5th, on Occupy Wall Street, on Guy Fawkes? Jim?
Occupy Wall Street. I'm trying to remember. I feel like my son was born like in September 2008, so I like shut off the news and like wasn't following anything, and then like 3 months later came up and realized that basically the global economy had collapsed. So I don't have much in the way of stories. I was living in New York at the time. I remember Occupy Wall Street. I don't think I ever actually went down there to Lower Manhattan. I don't really have much to share on that theme. Sorry.
How about like the emergence of Anonymous and the Guy Fawkes mask and that kind of like symbolism? Like I feel like it's more relevant than ever.
Yeah, it was really exciting. Like, who else was? Everybody's too young, maybe. Who else is an old one here? Everybody looks too young.
I'm probably the second oldest one here. I mean, look, there's definitely some correlations between Guy Fawkes Day and that whole story, which is just hardcore, by the way, man. Talk about like hardcore protesting. I love the fact that Bitcoin is a peaceful protest, right? We don't have to put a bunch of explosives underneath the Parliament building,
Yeah.
We can just buy some Bitcoin and talk shit on Twitter and drink on Zoom and really contribute honestly to this revolution. I'm not saying there's not going to be some fight ahead, but I think that we can opt out of this system peacefully, the system, might get violent in their attempt to retain control, because this thing is taken off, right? And if they haven't really been taking it seriously up to this point, and I think they will at some point, and there's going to be fights ahead. But the game theory plays out. We talk about this all the time, over and over and over again on podcasts, and the game theory, I think, is ultimately positive for a relatively peaceful transition to Bitcoin as a reserve asset, and eventually as the new money, the new global money standard that will usher in the Bitcoin Renaissance. The Guy Fawkes mask that my favorite, with all due respect to my buddy Brecky, but my favorite Bitcoin artist, Lucio Paletti, really does some awesome riffs on the Guy Fawkes mask. And I think that we sort of adopt that, or he has chosen to adopt that, because it is a symbol of protest. It's a symbol of anonymity. And I think that both of those principles are held dear among Bitcoiners. And so, yeah, I think it's a good symbol. And check out Lucio's work, luciopaletti.com. His stuff is just absolutely on fire. It's lit.
Yeah, huge fan of Lucio, and I'm confident we're going to be seeing some new high prices, and that Matt's block clock behind them is going to keep us up to date. I see it flashing over there.
I didn't even notice it back there.
Every 4 years, Bitcoin pumps on November 5th.
Oh, really? I didn't notice that.
Here's a question, because
it's happened the last 3 times.
Oh.
I've never.
Oh, shit.
I've got a question for you guys, because I'm just sort of curious what you think. I've never participated in one of these things before. Do you think that if, and of course it's like, this is a strange counterfactual, but if fiat currency, if governments managed fiat currency well, if there wasn't a lot of inflation, if there weren't capital controls, if, there was like reasonable government policy going into the future, would we not need Bitcoin? Would Bitcoin not succeed? Does Bitcoin's success hinge on poor management of government money?
Yeah. Yes.
Who wants to go?
I mean, that's Safe's major argument. Safe's major argument is like the biggest threat to Bitcoin is some like theoretical perfect money system that uses gold as a backing for it and is like completely honest and legitimate. And
it doesn't have to be gold, though. It doesn't have to be gold. If,
well, I mean, in his mind, like the perfect sound money design would be a gold system, but it's like it's the same concept, right? That you have like a perfectly well-functioning money system, so you don't need Bitcoin. But then you always just come to the conclusion that it's just not possible.
Not possible. It can't happen. We could think about it. It's a thought experiment, perhaps, but it's a useless one to have.
It can't happen because governments won't be able to prevent themselves from inflating and controlling.
Exactly.
Because politics is just corrupt.
Irresistible power.
Yeah, the cool part about Bitcoin to me is that it channels the greed to work. Right? Mm-hmm. Like every single player in the system is greedy because that's the only thing we can safely assume. We can't assume benevolence from anybody.
Right.
It channels greed for good. Fiat channels greed toward terrible ends. It channels greed to centralized power, to fund massive wars, etc. Bitcoin channels greed into like mutual self-interest, into like a hard money that's fair, and can create like fair prices and a much better economy for everyone.
And is ultimately a technology like Lightning, like a decentralized, like payment network built on top of Bitcoin, is that absolutely necessary for it to succeed? Because the thing that doesn't make sense to me about the Saifedean Ammous argument is like he believes in Bitcoin banks, right? Where it's like you'll have banks that just are backing their cash with Bitcoin, but like, why would the government allow that to happen? That's what doesn't make sense. Like you need something that actually can't be shut down to the medium of exchange. Do you guys agree with that or not?
Let's let Des jump in.
Why would we even need Bitcoin banks? Like if everybody is like operating on the network, then like technically everyone's connected through some route, right? So like that kind of obfuscates the need for any type of Bitcoin bank. I mean, I feel like that's like like that's kind of a requirement in the midterm, like to get to like that ideal state of not needing banks, but like isn't the end goal to like not need banks or any type of kind of institution like that?
Well, his argument actually was that we don't need Lightning, that we don't need an actual functional payment network for Bitcoin, that Bitcoin banks would suffice, and that kind of, I don't know, maybe his argument has changed, but I heard him make this argument that we're going to move in a direction where like banks are just backing all the everyone's deposits with Bitcoin, and that will function, and that but
yeah.
So I mean, free banking on Bitcoin is definitely an improvement. Like I just throwing that out there. And I mean, with technologies like Lightning, now the barrier to entry to provide free banking services or competitive banking services have never been lower. So I mean, it's really about.
I mean, free banking on Bitcoin would be an improvement, but why would governments let free banking on Bitcoin happen? If Bitcoin is actually replacing fiat currency such that they can no longer print money to finance the welfare warfare state, why would they allow,
I mean, how scalable are governments
to use Bitcoin?
How scalable and how effective are governments at taking down their enemies? I mean, I think there's at some point, there is just a point where they just can't co-opt everyone. They can't scale, and they can't efficiently take down all of these little ants that are just kind of popping up, providing little services. I mean, it's difficult to tell. Like, it's like, what's the right amount of decentralization? What's the right amount of non-custodial, lack of third parties? Like, what's the appropriate amount? What's the world going to change like as this stuff becomes more prevalent? Like, it's really hard to forecast what all that is going to look like.
Yeah, I don't think Lightning needs to work for Bitcoin to succeed. I think Lightning's a nice to have. I think it's a great thing to have. But Bitcoin is a base money. The base layer is all we need to work. And to me, the game theory comes down to why don't banks will just hold Bitcoin as reserve assets. They'll rehypothecate it. Governments may eventually go onto a Bitcoin standard and issue their own currencies on top of it, backed by Bitcoin. That would also be a huge success. But you cannot build the same level of like 4, 5, 6, 7 levels of rehypothecation of derivatives upon derivatives on a system where you can very easily demand final settlement. Bitcoin democratizes final settlement, and that is revolutionary. That has been the privilege of kings, monarchs, of central banks, and now we can demand final settlement very, very easily and cheaply. And so when you have that power distributed so widely, then it checks all of those abuses of fiat money.
I still don't understand though, because I mean FDR outlawed, made it illegal for Americans to hold gold balances in I think 1933, right? So why wouldn't they do the same for Bitcoin if they can? Why wouldn't? I mean, the advantage of Bitcoin over gold is that you can't control it as easily. They can't stop you from hoarding Bitcoin. They don't know if you have Bitcoin, right?
Yeah,
so
maybe. So I mean, I guess not to stray away from this topic, but we do have our final panelist joining us. Someone who is a legal expert and a lawyer in the space. Hailey, Lennon, welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, and then, I mean, maybe if you want to kind of address a little bit of what Jim is bringing up, 6102, confiscating Bitcoin, what would the government do, all those kind of things.
Oh, you're
muted, Hailey.
Oh, still don't quite have sound.
Still can't hear you.
No.
Let's see. Still muted. Still muted.
All right, Hailey, we're gonna let you figure out your sound issues. Who wants to continue on this conversation with Jim? Matt, I know you have some very strong opinions about privacy, 6102, all those things. Why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're on the right track, Jim. I think that it's not as seizure resistant as people want it to seem. I mean, we just saw the U.S. government seize $1 billion worth of Bitcoin because they figured out who owned it, and they told the guy, if you don't want to spend the rest of your years in jail, you're going to sign over these keys to me. And we don't know for sure they said that, but they must have said something to that effect. Otherwise, you're not going to sign 69,000 Bitcoin over to them. But compared to every other form of money we've ever had, it is the most seizure resistant. You know, people can go back and forth on, and maybe it should have a little bit easier to use privacy. And I think we can probably accomplish that after the fact, which is what a lot of people are trying to do, and which I've been very focused on. But if you compare it to every other form of money, including gold, which up until this point was the most seizure resistant, Bitcoin is clearly the most seizure resistant. Just the fact that you can easily store it in your own home or office, you know, as simple as words, you can easily send it around the world. And now with multi-sig, you know, in terms of like legal scholars, it gets really interesting, the seizure resistance qualities, because you could have keys in different jurisdictions and owned by different companies and different kind of enclaves. So there's some really interesting different scenarios there from a legal point of view in terms of ownership and trying to seize those funds.
You know, if
Also,
I could, go ahead, Stacy.
Well, I just think that, like, in 1933, the world was on a gold standard, and the U.S. needed gold because we were on a global gold standard. The U.S. dollar was not printable willy-nilly. Like, you couldn't just print it up and you know, settle your balance of payments deficit. So when FDR, he seized gold, but he paid, you know, the going rate, the exchange rate was paid. Like, you were forced to sell your gold to the government, and then they devalued it. But today, like, if so you're asking if the U.S. government would do the same?
I'm just trying to imagine. Always trying to imagine the scenario in which, because what excites me about Bitcoin is not like the price going up in the short term, but it actually replacing. Like, I don't want government issuing money. I think like government's power to issue money and to print money is at the sort, like, that's root evil in our society, and that's what drives my interest in Bitcoin. So when I'm thinking about future scenarios where the government sees that like Bitcoin is becoming money, and why wouldn't they do whatever was within their power to stop Bitcoin from being used?
It would have to be global and coordinated, and all governments working together. So we live in a globalized world, and even, you know, everybody usually obeys the US, but there's a few that don't, and even Europe. Like, so when Obama first pulled the SWIFT weapon, when he pulled the trigger on SWIFT and cut Iran off, a whole nation off from SWIFT, from using the global financial system, that has in turn triggered you know, China and Russia developing an alternative system, but even Germany has started to develop their own system. So, you know,
that's a good argument.
I think the appeal of a neutral settlements layer that nobody controls is obviously appealing to many people, even like Germany. You know, I think
I mean, for example, you have countries that hate the United States that nevertheless have moved to a dollar standard because that's the most stable currency, right? And if they had an alternative to a dollar standard, they might opt for it. That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, that's already been in development, though, for the last few years. Like, it's only been for the past 2 years, for example, that China and Russia now, they used to do 80% of their trade in dollars, and now they do none of it in dollars. So, you know, nations are already moving off because of the weaponization of the settlements layer. You know, Jim Rickards, who maybe is not quite a big fan of Bitcoin, but he does, you know, talk about gold all the time, and does do, you know, financial war games with at the CIA and that sort of thing. Like, he said on our show, Keiser Report, back in like 2010 or 11, when Obama first used SWIFT as a weapon, he said, you know, this is great. We're powerful. We could do this, but you got to be careful because you could only really use it once or twice. And then nations start developing an alternative. And of course, once we used it once, we used it twice, we used it 3 times, we've used it 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. So other nations are having to, you know, especially as the US isn't as much as part of world trade now as, say, China and other nations starting to displace us as a manufacturing powerhouse. So I just think, you know, the game theory for globalized world, it just doesn't seem like you could get all nations to agree to like ban their citizens from using it.
So,
Yeah,
and Brady, go for it, and then I do want to transition us to our first topic, but go for it.
I was just going to bring up the news about Iran turning to Bitcoin to fund imports, and that I think is a good example here because they've been crippled by sanctions from the U.S. government. So they're starting to fund imports with Bitcoin, and it's a way kind of around the control of by the U.S. dollar from the U.S. government. And so there are incentives for other countries outside of the United States to get off of a dollar standard. And then once that game theory starts playing out, then, you know, the ideas of Austrian economics come into play, and you end up sort of converging on the most saleable good, the best money, the most sound money. And, you know, if past is any prologue, then, you know, the U.S. government's going to continue to mismanage the U.S. dollar, and Bitcoin becomes more widely adopted, and then becomes more and more attractive as it becomes more and more adopted, and eventually beats out the dollar as the better money.
If I could jump in real quick too and kind of add my 2 cents, you know, I'm trying to build my own, you know, Bitcoin thesis in my head. And one thing that I keep coming back to is something that you brought up, Jim, which is that, you know, ultimately a money system is a replacement for trust, or is like, you know, augmented trust to some extent. And that I do believe you will always in future societies, even after Bitcoin ultimately succeeds, you will have communities where there is trust, and they won't have to use a base Bitcoin type currency in order to transact. I think that ultimately, if given enough time, the trust will eventually erode and they will fall back onto Bitcoin. But I think that that will be like an inevitability, is that as, you know, different communities of different sizes based on our different abilities to secure trust in those communities will develop their own monetary systems that will deviate from Bitcoin. But eventually, you know, they will fail because all centralized things fail.
So also following up on what Brady said is like, you know, if you remember Bitcoin from 2010 and 11 and 12, you know, when it was just individuals, it wasn't corporations like MicroStrategy, it wasn't governments like Iran, you know, it was just individuals. And who was it? It was the degenerates, right? It was Silk Road. It was, you know, it was WikiLeaks. It was the gambling sites, porn, like the people sanctioned from the payments rails. So those individuals found Bitcoin first, and we're seeing the same now with nation states. So you're going to see Venezuela, Iran, those who are the, you know, at the opposite end of the being cut off of the payments rail of SWIFT, you know, those cut off from there naturally are going to find their way first to Bitcoin. And that's always been something that was kind of known and suspected that would eventually happen, that it would be the ones that the US didn't like. So, I mean, I think that's perhaps, like, to Jim's point, you know, that's going to be the most difficult one to navigate, because the US is very serious about cutting off their enemies from being able to trade in any way. So,
but I think what you're describing is the reason why it was the Silk Roads, or it was the, you know, the sex workers that gravitate to Bitcoin, is because Bitcoin is inconvenient, but they had a reason to deal with the inconvenience of Bitcoin because they were cut off from usual simple sources, right? So I think I sort of have been thinking about this a lot in terms of, so I have a Spanish teacher who lives in Venezuela, and I've, you know, talked to her for hundreds of hours and proselytized Bitcoin, and she's really interested in Bitcoin, and she's totally down for trying Bitcoin, except I pay her with PayPal. And most of her students pay her with PayPal. And PayPal is basically her bank. She doesn't have a bank account. She collects all her money in PayPal, and she pays her bills in PayPal. It's all dollars. And she's interested in Bitcoin, and she would totally do Bitcoin, but like PayPal's working for her. You know, she's able to, it works. Like, it's not, there's not a lot of inflation, et cetera. But the minute that PayPal shuts down her account, which could happen any day, you know, there's nothing stopping them, then she has to turn to Bitcoin. It's basically, what's going to make her use Bitcoin? It's like she's back against the wall and there's no other alternative. And so, like, I think it's an example of, like, I mean, it would be terrible if PayPal shut down her account and said that Venezuelans can't have PayPal accounts. But I expect something like that might happen. Technically, they can't.
Technically, yeah, she's definitely already using that illegally, for sure.
She's using it illegally. Yeah, I don't.
100%.
Is that true? I'm not sure.
If she's a Venezuelan citizen, she's not supposed to have the PayPal account. So she technically can get cut off at any moment. And I mean, here's the reality, Jim.
And her money disappears too.
Bitcoin enables fintech though, because Bitcoin is programmable money. There's a company called Value, VALIU. They're based out of Colombia. They primarily serve Venezuela, and all they do is they plug their fintech platform that creates a stable dollar token into every single banking system in South America, and essentially they create that stable token by holding Bitcoin on the back end, by having uncensorable money on the back end, and having some sort of a dollar neutral strategy. And any fintech can use that to create a Bitcoin or create a PayPal-esque like service. So that's this kind of like free banking that I was talking about earlier. That, yeah, maybe they won't use Bitcoin straight up, but there's thousands of entrepreneurs that are now enabled to provide banking services to them in a way that is, that has a good UX that they're used to, that isn't a unit that they're used to. So it's like, when we think of Bitcoin, like, it's so easy to think of Bitcoin like, hey, I need to pay for coffee. It has to be nominated sats. It has to be like this right now. And that's just not how Bitcoin works. Bitcoin's more like water. It's breaking down the cliffs by the seashore slowly at a time, and eventually the beach will be there. But you got to be patient.
That's a big hurdle. She knows PayPal. She's used PayPal, even if it's like works just the same, but it's got a different name. Like, that's a really big to ask people, because this is people's money and they really, really want to use services that they trust.
Totally.
So it has to push them into something different. It needs to be something sort of like, basically.
Look how fast American millennials got into Venmo. I do want to transition us, though. Our first topic has to do with the election. We now, as Americans, have witnessed an election unlike any other, an election that has taken a long time to come to a conclusion, an election where there's a lot of vitriol and doubt from every corner. We have been talking as Bitcoiners about the fourth turning, about the end of the nation state, about our institutions crumbling. This seems like a pretty stark example of things going in the south direction. Hailey, how's your audio?
Is it working? Yay!
Oh, yes, we can hear you. Why don't you introduce yourself and then maybe give your 2 cents on, what we've seen the last 2 days.
That was a loaded first question for me to join. No, hi, it's good to be here, guys. My name's Hailey Lennon. I've been in this space since 2014, started at Silvergate Bank as legal advisor there when Silvergate was looking to bank the cryptocurrency space. I just recently joined a law firm, Anderson Kill, with a few exciting other partners in the space, including Stephen Pally and Preston Burns. And before that, I was regulatory counsel at Coinbase. So I like to joke that I'm the cool lawyer. I try to not be the attorney in the space that tells companies no, but tries to figure out how we can do things the right way. But I know that lawyers aren't always the most popular people in the crypto space either. So, but yeah, I'm happy to be here. I mean, in terms of the election, it's very on brand for 2020. It's been kind of a shit show, but I don't know. I mean, I think that regardless, I mean, maybe we can talk about the election in line with also the price of crypto, because it's sort of showing this ability for decentralized monetary systems to be separate from the chaos or uncertainty of politics, and in a way that's what I'm seeing. So, I mean, in terms of the actual election, I think we'll probably know one way or another where the everything falls by next week. But yeah, it's been a mess, and I've seen a lot of things on Twitter about people sort of using this as an example of why maybe the voting system should be on the blockchain and that sort of thing. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on that, if that's the solution, or if that's just a good example of
Where's
blockchain.
Alex Gladstein?
What?
Where's Alex Gladstein now? But yeah, I mean the voting thing, like there's never been more shade cast on the system for voting.
Yep.
Who wants to jump in here?
Well, I think I'll say something controversial. I think we were talking about censorship of payments, and that caused an outcome that has altered the global financial system. I think there was a censorship of a political vote that happened, and people weren't happy with it in 2016. And I think Trump was legitimately elected, and I think the Democrats are culturally have all the power, and they control the mainstream media. And I think they tried to censor the political vote. I think they've spent 4 years concocting elaborate conspiracy theories and gaslighting the American population, and basically stoking a civil war. I mean, the guy Jeffrey Toobin masturbating while the New Yorker magazine is imagining, they were doing a fictional that there's a civil war that breaks out on the election. That's the epitome of what they've been doing for the last 4 years. I myself have been a Democrat my whole life, and they caused me to just drop out of to unregister as a Democrat because of the grotesquerie of what they've become. And I think I think this election the result showed that once again the elite keep on getting it wrong. They got it wrong in 2016. They got the U.S. election wrong. They got Brexit wrong. We ourselves were not allowed to talk about either of the elections, but they, from their smug, I call them the smug industrial complex, speak from Washington, D.C. and New York City and say all these deplorable, horrible people in America who are dying of overdoses. They're opioid addicts. They're scumbags. They used to have jobs. They don't have jobs because we sent all their manufacturing to China. They hate the ordinary people so much and have so much contempt for them, partly because they're projecting, because they're the ones that destroyed our economy. They're the ones that exported all our jobs. They're the ones that introduced the Cantillon effect. They're the ones that do this, and they feel guilty about it and project. So I think just 2016 that started this process, and I think 2020 has proved the fact that the Latinos vote swing to Trump, the black vote swing to Trump. It's the hugest minority vote for Trump, for a Republican candidate in since Nixon. So this is a constant kick in the face of the censors from the mainstream media elite. That's what I think.
Strong, very, very strong opinions there.
I hate smug people. I hate it. I hate smuggery. It's just it's so gross.
When you started your comment, I thought you were also going to talk about the censorship of Twitter itself, because I've been I don't think, maybe entertain's not the right word, but every time there's a post, including by Trump, that Twitter is now saying is potentially not true or factual, and then it's being censored. The whole thing has just been, it's interesting how now social media is impacting.
It's outrageous. I think it's outrageous to censor the president like that, or anybody, except for maybe some horrible pedophiles or whatever. But it's just this opinion during an election. It seems crazy to censor it. It just seems they're projecting this desire for a civil war, and I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's the U.S. Constitution is the original brilliant consensus protocol, and we should abide by it. It doesn't, if you can't persuade the population to vote for Hillary Clinton because it was her turn, well, maybe you need a better argument than saying it's her turn. Maybe they don't care about it being her turn. Maybe you come to them with policies instead, or more charisma. Instead, they've had this, they're trying to destroy the entire fabric. They're openly calling, by the way, as a lawyer, Hailey, what do you think of this? There was a New York Times magazine ran a piece 2 weeks ago that we need to get rid of the First Amendment, that it's actually not a good idea. There was another one in another major woke magazine where they're saying that, in fact, the entire Constitution needs to be gotten rid of, that we don't need it, and that we should rewrite it in order to basically make sure that we never have to hear from deplorable people again.
That's, I don't even know where these like monoliths that of like different constituents has like even come from. Like it's like that, it's become so disgusting. Like honestly on both sides, and like coming from Ohio in like a very rural area, like I had live and know these people, and like I mean I don't support Trump and didn't vote for him, but I see these people who are not the people who were shown that vote for Trump, and like there's so much hatred to these people in the middle of the country, and it's like, I mean, it's driving people apart. And I mean, it's the same type of, you know, portrayal of like the other side of the spectrum is being shown too. And I mean, it really is just like it's so frightening, like how much is driving a wedge in the country. And like I think like censoring and just like, you know, people manipulating information is just like going to like continue to like, really fuck everything up, honestly.
Yeah, I just think all that hate is just horrible, and I think it's destructive, and we don't, you know, I think people don't need to abide by that. I think, you know, in a way, the censorship on Twitter, I mean, what do you think about the laws around that and the Section 230, Hailey? Because like, should they be just censoring? I mean, it's clear they have, there's a bias, right, in the censorship. So like, why, what's the argument to not censor?
Yeah, I don't think it's a simple answer. I mean, I think that we've had years of trying to find this balance between limiting rights, and I mean, you talking about like throwing out the Constitution. Clearly, I'm not a proponent of that, but there's also this like misinformation and the fight on that. So you know, I don't have the answer, definitely. I mean, I found it striking in this election that it seems like there is misinformation from both sides. Is that Twitter's role to try to filter that out for viewers, or should viewers go do their own research and make up their own decisions? I don't know, but yeah, it's just it's been
wait, section 230 means that like Twitter is not legally liable for things that people say on its platform. So if you repealed Section 230, there would have to be much more censorship, or you wouldn't even have the existence of platforms like Twitter. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about, I mean, Section 230 is like bedrock in terms of free speech rights. It's the free speech, it's like free speech law of the internet. So I don't think that.
And
so I want to.
I think Bitcoin. I mean, I think Bitcoin. You know, I hope Section 230 might be applied to Bitcoin in the future as well. So I mean, I think Section 230 is definitely needed. That's one way that we could just see Bitcoin straight up legalized.
How would Section 230 be applied to Bitcoin?
Because Bitcoin is speech.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, Bitcoin is speech. Bitcoin is the transfer of data, of communications between people, the communication of value through data. So it's the same thing as internet communications.
But nobody can censor Bitcoin. That's the thing, is like what the argument from the Republicans at the moment, because they're the ones being censored, is that by censoring, by Jack Dorsey deciding to censor certain opinions, that means he's a publisher. He's like the New York Times or the Washington Post. And that's why it's not a neutral platform. And therefore, that's why Section 230 does not apply to him. Bitcoin doesn't do that. They allow like Iran to use it. So that's what they're not censor. There is nobody there to censor.
Yeah, it fits for sure.
I want to let Matt jump in here. Matt, you've talked about a future where Twitter lets you choose who curates your feed and stuff like that. I think you've thought about like the nuances here between the legalities of a publisher versus an aggregation network and stuff like that.
First of all, I 100% agree with Jim that people will seek out Bitcoin when they need it. And until that happens, there's no reason for them to do it unless they're speculating on price, because a centralized option will always be cheaper, faster, and easier to use. In terms of Section 230, it's absolutely a necessity for the way our current centralized internet operates. We live in a heavy litigious society that pretty much destroys so many elements of our daily lives with additional regulatory burden because it's such a litigious society. And Section 230 allows these internet companies to somehow navigate that without just having ridiculous liability for everything we post on the internet all the fucking time. And then last but not least, I mean, I think Twitter and Facebook, like, they put themselves in this situation because they decided to be God and try and control what we see. I think the solution is on a short-term basis for their own self-preservation should be very simple. They should switch back to time-based feeds. They shouldn't have this algorithmic feed where we don't know really what's going on and it's based on their own proprietary information on what gets shown to you or not. It should just be shown to you based on time, without them injecting anything there. And then they can have, you know, moderation lists that you subscribe to. You subscribe to, you know, like the Red Cross or whatever organization you want to subscribe to. You can subscribe to their block list, or you could subscribe to nothing. And then you can just have good old-fashioned police work if like bad people do bad things. Barring all of that happening, which I kind of doubt they end up doing that themselves, I think ultimately it goes all the way back to what I said in the beginning about people seeking out Bitcoin when they have no other option. I think we just go down this hellhole where just people, it just gets worse and worse and worse on the centralized platforms, and people will seek out platforms where you cannot block people by design the way they're set up to begin with. But like, people just need to get burned first before we really get to that point.
I would echo what you're saying, Matt, and I would also kind of add that, you know, so I guess really two thoughts. First off, you know, Chamath had a really good comment, who's, by the way, speaking at Bitcoin 2021, if anyone wants to check it out. But he was talking about, he's one of the original people at Facebook, and he was saying that, you know, ultimately, if Twitter chooses to go on with this censorship and go on kind of as a publisher and like editorialize what is being shown on Twitter, then Twitter, you know, 230 needs to be reinterpreted in order to show that Twitter does not fall under it. And at the same time, the market should emerge for other social media sites where people, you know, that have different curation, different editorialized opinions, like, you know, some that don't editorialize it, and some that, you know, have algorithmic feeds, some that have time feed. Like, all of this should be able to emerge in a free market where people can kind of choose, and people will ultimately navigate and gravitate to kind of the platforms that fill their needs and kind of, you know, move their machinery in their heads. So that's the one thing I would say. But then kind of in this same vein and broadening out the conversation a little bit, you know, I would say what's interested me about this election and really the past couple elections is that, you know, I think that from a media standpoint, we've gotten very good at pushing people's buttons, and we've figured out exactly what makes people tick. And we've been able to just divide people so effectively.
Or click, as the case may be.
Yeah, make people click for sure. We've been able to just like get in people's core, and like everyone is feeling so upset about the other side. And you know, my opinion is that neither side is actually trying to address any of the real issues people have. I mean, people want you know, security. People want to be able to build wealth. People want to be able to, you know, not worry about their 9-to-5 job going away, and they want to feel safe and protected. And it's like, you know, a lot of the problems that people have, in my opinion, come from the fiat system itself. And, you know, it's like, who's trying to fix that? Who's trying to make sure that people have an efficient way to build wealth for themselves? They don't have to trust in some Fortune 500 company's stock in order to make sure that they can stop working when their body gives out, you know? And so from my perspective, you know, it feels like the conversations have been bifurcated and woven in a way where everyone has this internal feeling that like their needs aren't being met by this government system, and yet they aren't giving us the vocabulary and giving us like the conversations to be able to actually address those. And so it just pushes people to be more frustrated, more angry, and ending up just taking it out on the other side. And so that's actually an incredibly smug way to sit in the middle and say both sides are screwed up. So sorry, Stacy, but that's kind of my take.
No, that wasn't smug. That was an intelligent analysis. Smug is just when, you know, cable news. That's the definition of it. Tune in. You'll see them all being smug about the other side. And punching down. That's like the worst thing. If
Lots
you're
of
gonna
punching
punch
down.
What?
Lots of punching down. Lots of down punching. It's
you're
like,
gonna-
oh, they don't believe in science. We are fact seekers, you know, or
If you're
whatever.
gonna
Both sides will say the
punch
same
up.
thing.
That's the only way to punch is punching up. And if they don't believe in science, like tell them, like do a better job. That's your job as a as a media presenter. You're supposed to, as a journalist, you're supposed to do a better job. So, or the politicians, like you don't punch down at them and just call them deplorable and say go overdose on some opioids. You know, that's not how you run a society.
So I guess my question is, like, we can talk about two things. We can either talk about like how did we get here, like how, and I know there's a lot of history here and there's a lot of historians here that can talk about that. Or the next question is like, where do we go from here, right? Because it seems as though Joe Biden will be officially crowned the president. A lot of other things haven't changed that much, you know, in terms of like the House, the Senate, governorships. You know, asset prices are going up. Bitcoin in particular has performed extremely well. Like, what does this all mean? I'm just like, does anyone here kind of have a strong opinion on, you know, what's kind of unfolding in front of our eyes? Brady,
Well,
you've been pretty silent here.
No, I have not. That's not true. Just for a little spell. But Jim wants to go, and then I'll go.
I mean, I was just going to say, from the standpoint of Bitcoin, it doesn't. What is it? There's no difference. I mean, the both parties are going to. I mean, Joe Biden's platform is, you know, he wants to add $11 trillion in new spending over a decade, and Trump was running the largest budget deficits in history. I mean, it's like, I mean, there's no difference between the two parties in terms of printing money and ultimately, you know, destroying the federal balance sheet.
Brady, your turn.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter either way in terms of the way the money's going to be run. I mean, we saw that Barron's cover, right, where Jerome Powell was held up as the hero. In fact, it just said the winner. No matter you know, the outcome of this election, the winner is Jerome Powell, because he's really, you know, the one in control of what's going on here. A similar like cover, I think, I don't know, it was Time or one of those national magazines in 2008 with you know, the plunge protection team, you know, here to save the day, literally like superheroes, like opening up their coat jackets and with a big S on their shirt underneath, and they're here to like literally save all of us. That's the reality here that we're in, and it makes the federal government less and less, the policies less and less important, because the money manipulation is what's really causing the outcomes. Like that's really the underlying cause of the major outcomes of economic distress that we're experiencing, and it's hard to see. It's insidious, and you know, if you study things for a long time, and Bitcoin helps open your eyes to this, you'll see it. But it's not apparent. It's not talked about. You know.
I'm curious though, when you say it's causing distress in the present, I mean, I mostly see this as a disaster that's coming. Once, you know, we can no longer get away with printing money, once the world no longer wants to buy our bonds and our currency and so forth. When you're talking about it impacting us in the present, why? Because money would be increasing in purchasing power in the present if we weren't printing money, or like what is happening now?
Yeah, well, so it drives tremendous wealth inequality over time. The people who have access to the money, the first round of the money printed, basically are incredibly enriched, because they get it at zero or near zero interest rates, and then they pass it down to the next level, the bank, you know, retail banks at a slightly larger interest rate, and the banks pass it down to the landed gentry, if you will, at you know, a slightly higher interest rate, and all the way down to you know, credit card interest rates and payday loans, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just this giant pyramid scheme of interest rates all the way down. And that is driven by the ability to print the money. So the more money you can print, the easier it is to enrich everyone at the top. You know, all of these people who, you see all this money that's being printed going into equities and driving up the stock market, and Donald Trump saying, hey, you know, all-time high in the Dow Jones, the economy is amazing. the people who are holding those assets are not the middle class. They're not really, I mean, not even a lot of the upper middle class. They will hold a bit in their 401k, et cetera. But that's just enriching the rich. And then the rest of the economy is losing purchasing power over time. Wages are stagnating. So yeah, it's an insidious force that is really at the root of the economic distress that we have slowly been experiencing in this country for the past 50 years. And then that just goes to a whole nother level around the whole world, because that cancel-on effect applies internationally as well. And we sit in this privileged chair as the holders or creators of the global reserve asset. So it's just, it is literally the root of all evil, and it's hard for everyone to see. It's not just money itself, it's the control of the money that's the root of all evil.
I would jump into that. During that pyramid, like what you described, or that flow, there's permission at every step as well. And I think that that's the key difference between Bitcoin. And as Bitcoin emerges over time and it becomes more liquid, the fact that it will always be permissionless at its core is a key driver here. Stacy.
I would just point out as well as that domestic, the money printing, and the fact that Jerome Powell is on the cover of Barron's magazine as being the winner, that the actual day of the election, the markets told us what was the most important issue at stake here. And that is the Thucydides trap, which is the rising power, which is China. And when Trump suddenly looked like he was definitely going to win, like in a 2016 sort of situation, the Chinese yuan crashed and the dollar soared. And then within an hour, once it reversed, they did the exact opposite. So the investors, the market was looking mostly at that relationship between the US and China that day. That's what global investors were looking at. That was the most important issue. All the other domestic civil war sort of issues, those were secondary. Nobody cares about that. What they were looking at was that relationship. How Biden is going to do it, it's going to be status quo, return to status quo. You know, he was instrumental in helping get China into the WTO on most favored nation status, and getting to, you know, they're still considered developing nations. So they imposed 25% tariffs on most of our goods, for example, because by WTO regulations. But I think the market thought, you know, that this Trump, the tariffs, which are driven by Robert Lighthizer, by the way, who back in the late 1990s was one of the sole voices in America saying, this is a disaster if we send all our jobs, if we allow China to be part of the WTO at the status that we're letting them in, like they're going to eat our lunch. They're going to take every single one of our jobs. Joe Biden laughed at him at that time and said, come on, China's going to eat our lunch? Pfft, come on, man. And obviously Lighthizer turned out to be right. So I think this is the issue that, and I think with Biden in office, it'll just continue, and there won't be any confrontation. China will just take over. They'll be the #1 economy in the world soon enough. And that's what the investors saw as well.
Well, I definitely did see the dollar yuan, but I don't know. I just personally think that central planning doesn't work. So that's why I'm dubious with the narrative that China's just going to take over, because I think that they will continue to make mistakes.
Des, do you have anything you want to add?
And sorry, go ahead, Des.
No, sorry, go on. I am just like listening to. I mean, I'm like Stacy. You're just like so much information. I love it.
I think that's a problem when you say, well, China's not going to be able to take over. You know, hubris always leads to your downfall. Is they are like, why did this trade war get so hot and so hard so fast? Look at the timeline of what happened. Huawei, it suddenly dawned on America and the Department of Defense in particular that Huawei had all the 5G technology and we had none. And in fact, our allies, you know, there are two competitors in Europe are more than twice the price. Then you had TikTok. What is TikTok about? Another thing that technology that the Department of Defense is very, very concerned about, which is artificial intelligence. Why is TikTok so addictive? is because of the artificial intelligence within it. So, and they kicked the ass of all the US competitors. Why did they kick the ass so hard of all the Silicon Valley tech giants? Because, you know, the artificial intelligence, there's something in there that keeps you addicted. So I just think that there's, China's kicking our ass on high tech, and they're a few years ahead of us. And I think that's an issue. And I think with Biden versus Trump, they're going to continue. Right now, they're 2 or 3 years ahead of us, based on our conversations with experts from China. They'll be 5 or 6 years ahead of us by the end of a Biden term.
I don't know about this narrative. I've been listening to a lot of Peter Zeihan and reading him, and it's kind of turning around my perspective on the geopolitical narrative, especially the one that China's, you know, going to really become a dominant world power. They're so over leveraged at this point, far beyond the United States at this point. The money printing there is insane. And
Brady,
the debt levels are insane.
Look at the game theory of that. I presented this on our show a few weeks ago.
I heard. Yeah,
it's
go
like,
ahead.
When did they start money printing? They were like, the people themselves are huge savers, but when did the government start printing? Right after 2008 financial crisis, because they knew this system was going to blow up. They knew this US fiat system. So why not? I was saying at that time, I was saying the US should just like print a whole bunch, like go hugely into debt, but build infrastructure, because it's all going to blow up. Why not do it while you can get it for free?
Yeah. And well, I mean, they're basically, my point is they've gone in on the same path. Like they're on the same path as the United States. They're not on some different trajectory that, you know, the US is going to blow up and they're not. Like it's all tied together at this point. And I think I don't see a separation, I guess. I see everybody going down with the same ship, because China's not doing anything different monetarily than the United States.
They're doing stuff differently infrastructure-wise, structurally.
Yeah.
Look at their huge, like when it blows up, what's America going to have? Dilapidated infrastructures, bridges falling down, the airports like looking from the 1960s. Like,
I agree with you on that. No, I agree with you on that. Like the money printing, instead of going into stock buyback, should be going into infrastructure planning. And hey, if you're going to print a bunch of money and like you actually want to like attempt through that means to like achieve some greater sense of equality, then yeah, you need the money should go directly to people, which is why people have been talking about UBI, etc. But you know, once you start doing that too, and all that money goes directly into the real economy, then you have a much higher inflation risk. So you got to be careful.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one thing I'm thinking through as we're talking about this, though, in terms of like global financial systems and how different presidential candidates view like the United States economics and monetary policy, there's also the other side of the coin where it's what do these presidential candidates think about cryptocurrency, and like does that actually impact how the United States approaches a relationship with cryptocurrency or stable coins or essentially centralized banking coin, because Trump has been very vocal about not liking crypto. Does that matter? I mean, if we have people in the OCC and people in various US regulatory bodies allowing rules and regulations to go through that maybe don't completely stifle the innovation of the United States, is that important? Is it possible that if Biden does win and he has a slightly different tone on cryptocurrency, that it would actually trickle down and change anything?
So I guess just to add on to that, can politicians' positions in the United States impact Bitcoin? Matt, I know, again, like we've talked about 6102, you famously said that you thought that if Hillary was elected, that she would crack down on Bitcoin right away. And the fact that Trump was elected,
she was born to regulate Bitcoin.
Yeah, and that you said that Trump, was someone who, would just let it kind of happen. I mean, but what's your take here?
He got a little bit aggressive towards the end there.
In what way?
I mean, Anthony Barr, his AG, did like 2 salvos against us in the last 6 months, one against encryption and one against crypto with his crypto framework. So I'm kind of the mindset. I think it doesn't really matter in terms of like Bitcoin's. We might have passed escape velocity already, but I think there might be an argument to be made that maybe in the short term for Bitcoin, best case scenario is just like kind of chaos in America. So if we could have, like if we're going to talk about it in a vacuum, if we could just have the AG switch and then like maybe focus on like Russia and Trump and shit and just get distracted from like what Barr wants to do right now and then switch again. And then maybe we'll be for sure in escape velocity.
But Bitcoin was mostly under the radar for Trump and for Biden also, right? Biden doesn't think.
Trump had that one tweet.
That one tweet, right?
And Mnuchin kind of came at us.
But isn't the point like, isn't it good? Bitcoin should stay under the radar for as long as possible to get bigger and more, so the technology can improve and so that more money goes into it, so it can withstand the big assault that is inevitable. But the later it happens, the better.
Right. The longer we can put off any kind of major altercation with a major government, the better.
Yeah.
But Trump,
and I think Trump pushed
sons.
that off from Hillary. Like Hillary was ready to do it. She was gonna like get around with all the banking buddies and like make it happen.
But I know Trump's two sons are Bitcoiners, so I don't think he
Kushner
was
definitely
ever.
has Bitcoin.
That what?
Kushner definitely has Bitcoin.
But Don Jr. and Eric, they're also Bitcoiners. So I know.
Are they
that.
Bitcoiners or do they own Bitcoin? I mean, in my book, if you own Bitcoin, you're Bitcoiner. But like, are
They're
they
not
culturally Bitcoiners? Like,
no,
what do you mean?
They're not Bitcoiners like real Bitcoiners. But I know from Matthew Mellon, who's now passed away, but who was friends with them. I saw like DMs on his phone. Like I know they have Bitcoin.
So then maybe they won't be too sad after tonight, and after tomorrow. If Bitcoin still goes up, they'll be all right.
It's probably not that much of a portion, but I mean, we should suspect that every politician's going to have kids that have Bitcoin, right? Like when number goes up like that, when Bitcoin is as sexy as it is today, like it's kind of hard for it not to kind of get into your loved ones' hands, especially your younger ones.
Wasn't that actually a Jamie Dimon story? Like he was shitting on Bitcoin, and then it's like, oh wait, my daughter owns a lot of Bitcoin.
I was just gonna say that. His daughter Laura, she owned Bitcoin.
I would also add like one other new vector of kind of protection for Bitcoin is as more and more publicly traded companies put it on their balance sheet. If the U.S. government starts trying to mess with it, like they could actually be hurting the stock market, and nobody wants to do that, right? So, unexpected kind of protection there.
But I mean, when does that happen in a legitimate way, right? We got like 4 of them now. I mean, that's better than nothing.
I don't know if that's real protection. I mean, it depends. I think maybe it helps the network, but I don't think that helps like individual sovereign Bitcoiners. Just like I don't think like Coinbase will go to bat for us. Like it doesn't matter that Coinbase has like 1 million Bitcoin and it's like ex-Goldman, got Andreessen Horowitz there. Like they don't fucking give a shit about like just regular old Bitcoiners keeping self-custody, like, transacting.
Fair.
So fair. I want to go back to Jim on this. Jim, you're obviously a Bitcoiner. You obviously know more about cypherpunk history than most Bitcoiners, but you may not be, a frequent on Bitcoin Twitter and all that kind of stuff. Like for a libertarian, for someone who has a deep understanding of liberty and potentially is a gold bug, probably is trying to vote for Joe Jorgensen. Not Joe Biden. Like what about Bitcoin kind of gets them excited? And when they think about Coinbase, do they think is like Coinbase like an institution that's trying to help them, or do they see Coinbase as like an organization that is, they're collecting their KYC, they're going to report all their information to the government? Like, how are they viewing the cryptocurrency space?
Who's they?
I guess, a gold bug that is dipping their toes into Bitcoin, a libertarian that's dipping their toes into Bitcoin, someone who might not be like a hardcore Bitcoiner.
I think a libertarian who is dipping their toes into Bitcoin and isn't hardcore and doesn't sort of know like the not your keys, not your coins ethos is just going to go with Coinbase and is going to be very uncomfortable with like having a Trezor in there with like thousands of dollars in their drawer. I mean, actually, when Desiree was earlier talking about how like, well, maybe we won't have banks. And I guess you could imagine sort of like a decentralized banking system with keys and escrow or multi-sig or something like that. I guess that could be true. But I think that when you think about broad adoption, I mean, most people just want to trust a third-party institution with their savings. And I think it doesn't even, like actually I was having a conversation, he's not a libertarian.
Even a libertarian?
Yes, even many libertarians who are not like that tech savvy and don't want to worry
But what about gold?
What about
like,
gold?
Isn't that ethos
do they
already
wanna
there
hold
with
their
gold? Like not paper gold, like you should have physical gold.
I don't know that many gold bugs, but I certainly, like, I was just chatting with a dad, like the dad of a friend of my son's, and we were in the playground talking. He's like, yeah, I just bought some Bitcoin. He's not a libertarian. He just got interested in Bitcoin, and I was probing him a little bit, and he's just going to buy it through Coinbase. He's going to do what's easy. And, he just doesn't even think about it. So I think this idea of like the difference between Coinbase and then holding your own keys is something that like only occurs to real Bitcoiners. I don't think that, and if Coinbase were illegal, if it were, if there was a, Coinbase were shut down or somehow illegal to hold Bitcoin, they would go along with that. They would pull out. There'd be no issue. But I think those are the people who I think of as being really important, because the people like who are on this call, this meeting, are people who are like ideologically driven, and we matter less than the people who are just going, like, we need to win over the other 99.9% who are going to do what's easy and convenient. And that's the big hurdle. Right. So that's why I think it is actually really important to talk to people who are just want to do what's easy, practical, that'll make them some money, and aren't driven by the ideology behind the technology as I am.
Yeah, I definitely want to make clear that, well, yes, like I am totally, for non-custodial solutions, that I'm like totally aware that, there is this huge learning curve, and I think there is a place, and there are people that need custodial solutions, and like there's got to be like a much easier user-friendly experience for people to like actually custody their own funds. And so I think that there's like a very, very long on-ramp to getting people there. So I do think that there is like a place for what you're talking about. I mean, obviously the ideal is having everybody, hold their own keys and control their own funds, but like that is so far off. Like that's a nice goal, but like, I realize that we have a lot of work to do to get there.
I think just to say, like, I agree with you. Like, that's where I hope this all goes. But the baby steps and like and not even, I obviously was with Coinbase. I'm not talking specifically about Coinbase, but companies that help those like baby steps. And I know that this might be an unpopular opinion, but those companies that try to teach regulators with those baby steps, in an ideal world, could this have nothing to do with day one, have nothing to do with KYC, needing to know who your customer is, allowing people to transition money between parties without knowing who they are? In my ideal world, yes, but that's not like the world, at least in the US right now. So in my mind, a lot of the ways in which you start to progress this space and get there are these sort of baby steps of companies that custody the keys for you and crypto for you, companies that have to do the KYC and the non-libertarian ideals. So I found that a really interesting part of like my career in the space is trying to meld those two, like my ideals with what some companies need to do here in the US to help try to grow the industry a bit.
Can I ask a question, somewhat related, but about Lightning to people, about sort of micropayments and Lightning? Because I think, and shut me down if I'm taking us in the wrong direction. But I mean, I think there's no technology in the Bitcoin space that I'm more excited about than Lightning. However, I also sort of have struggling with, and I'm wondering if people can help me with this, struggling with the argument that actually micropayments are not something that consumers want. I know this is only one use case of Lightning, micropayments, but there's an old Clay Shirky essay against micropayments that I actually found sort of convincing. And of course, there's a well-known Nick Szabo, getting into the cypherpunks, a Nick Szabo essay against micropayments. And I think it's like, there have been so many attempts at building micropayment systems going back to the early internet. None of them have worked. There's no evidence that it's something that consumers want. And sort of like even the idea of like streaming money, which people talk about in the Lightning space, is like, why do we necessarily need that? Why can't we just get, like, why is that better? And it's something that I'm sort of struggling with, and I'm wondering what people think.
I want to like point out, like, what you should definitely check out. Someone who actually just joined Lightning Labs. Like a lot of the stuff that Ryan Gentry has written about Web3 and like a lot around streaming payments, and he's like kind of evolving to be like a little bit of like a thought leader in that space. So he's done a lot of like good research into that. But I mean, I will just speak like it from like a first case scenario. Like, I think that, you know, you're probably right. There isn't a huge demand for like micropayments at this very moment, but like it's opening the door to new possibilities. Like, I can speak firsthand of like McGox and Zebedee and other like game studios like Satoshi's Games and Donner Lab. Like, it is insane how many people are coming to play these games to get these small tiny payments all the time. Like, we will see 15,000 transactions in like an hour and a half period just during one esports tournament. And I mean, people get so excited to get 10 Satoshis. They will win 10 Satoshis. I mean, it's like literally, I can't even, like, that's such a small amount of money, and it is like such a huge incentive to bring people to this platform. And so, I mean, you know, this is obviously like a very niche ecosystem of like esports, but you know, it's working, and like the demand is there. Like, we created McGox as like a one-time fun thing to do when the pandemic started, and like we can't keep up with the demand at this point because we have all these like gamers wanting to win 10 sats for playing some stupid monkey game. But
wouldn't it also work with just credit cards? Like, what is it about? I mean, it's an interesting demonstration project, but I don't know. I'm not saying, like, I'm just wrestling with it. I'm just bringing my internal like this is just something I'm wrestling with personally.
This stuff always starts out as a toy, you know. It starts out as a toy, as a little demo project. That's how tech always starts.
But what's the end game? Why is it like, you know? I mean, the Nick Szabo argument was basically mental transaction costs, like
global medium of exchange. It doesn't have to necessarily be micropayments, but that's the future of Lightning. Like, I mean, micropayments can happen on Lightning. You could do sub-Satoshi stuff, you know, like. If micropayments are going to be useful, Lightning will make it happen. And I think with gaming, that's definitely, like, online gaming is freaking huge, and like, you know, winning some money for each little kill is pretty cool. So I could see that being a use case, but like, Lightning doesn't necessarily need microtransactions to be super useful, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
so yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, it, like, what you just said about like the mental like expense of like doing these things. Like, I mean, it would be so much more difficult for me to use a credit card to, like, I mean, I'll look at my wallet transactions and I'll have easily like 70 wallet transactions over the course of the event where I'm just literally like paying 10 sats, 10 sats, 10 sats to like drop power-ups in the game, to like create active gods in the game, to like mess with the people who are actually playing the game. And that's me just sitting at my computer watching, right? Like, and it's
you could load up your card. Like, you could load up a card at the outset, right? I mean, you could,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, technically, but then I'd have to load it up with the amount that I wanted to spend, and then like hopefully it wasn't like some weird walled garden where then I couldn't take my money out. Like it's literally there's a static QR code. I just open my phone and like just I'm pretty much streaming payments at that point. I mean, yeah, I mean like you could technically do it with your credit card, but like this is still so early on, and it's already easier than just using a credit card. And at some point like you get into things where you have to like go buy whatever X, Y, and Z game box and then, transfer that in. It becomes like that becomes way more complicated to me. Like using my PlayStation, my Switch is like way more complicated than just streaming these payments with like the Zebedee wallet, for example.
The key is removing regulatory friction. If we didn't have regulatory friction, we could just do all this shit centralized and you just wouldn't even have to deal with it. And it's all just a big way of trying to route around all of that different border obstruction and regulations going from a state by state basis, and all that cost that gets added to it, and just straight up UX friction just makes it really fucking difficult.
But I think that's an important distinction. It's like it's about getting away from bad government policy, government mismanagement of money, and that's the key. It's not that it's technically better,
but it's a dangerous thing to talk about, so no one talks about it. So we just pretend like this is cool technology, which it is a cool technology, but we just focus on the cool technology part.
Well, if I could
ignore the fact that it's mostly to route around regulation.
If I could jump in real quick, our company's actually building a micropayments platform on Lightning called Carrot. That is literally our goal is to be able to pay people to do tasks that are, you wouldn't be able to pay someone without using Lightning, basically. And like we have, we're paying people to fill out surveys. We're paying people to go, subscribe to our YouTube. We're paying people to do XYZ kind of tasks that are like, they're so small. It's impossible to capture that value with a normal economic unit. And so it's like,
I don't follow that though. Why is it impossible? Why can't you?
What would you price someone to like? What would you pay someone to like a tweet? You got a really fire tweet. What would you pay 1 billion people or 1 million people to like your tweet per like?
Well, okay. I mean, so let's say it's 1/10 of a penny,
mm-hmm.
right? So, but if you're paying them, overall, let's say they're going to make $1. So then, they do it 1,000 times, and then you pay them the $1. You settle up at $1.
Well,
I'm just not clear on what problem that solves.
Well, so I mean, I think exactly that assumption. You don't have to settle up at $1. You can just transact that 1/10 of a penny and go on to the next task that you're going to do. And people, it allows people to have this whole new level kind of their own economic. But until
I have $1, why is it even worth cashing out and taking my money? I mean,
I guess
maybe in
because
America
you could do like 100 different tasks, right? You could do like a tweet and then 100 different things, and then you could settle up. But still.
So let me just jump in really quick. Like, okay, so first and foremost, comparing to the legacy world and why would I do this in this legacy mindset just doesn't make sense when you look to Bitcoin, because the legacy units just were not as efficient and were not as concise and were not as good at measuring value than a future Bitcoin standard world would be. So maybe we don't even have the ability to effectively price micro tasks right now, and maybe on a Bitcoin standard we will. It's impossible to kind of forecast that future and the use cases that will be enabled once that has emerged. Like today, we're stuck in this world where we haven't invented the internet yet. We're still on this analog world. Like it's just impossible for us to imagine. So we can go back and forth. Like, why won't you sell this on the credit card? Why don't we just dollar it up and saddle it up then? But like that just, okay, yeah, we can just keep doing that. But guess what? When there is a business that is enabled through this new technology, through the ability to route around regulation seamlessly and have seamless liquidity, these new creative ways to leverage value over the internet are going to emerge. So, I mean, like, again, we can be stuck on this conversation, but it's impossible to tell
But
at
I guess
this point.
I
It's just
kind
too
of
early.
think that like I guess my feeling is like micropayments is something that we can do now. It just doesn't solve, maybe it doesn't solve a real problem that people have. Like maybe it's just not a.
I think these were debates already settled like 8 or 9 years ago, and I think the least interesting thing about Lightning is micropayments. I think the fact that it's like opens up an entire, you know, like it actually makes Bitcoin like gold 2.0 genuinely. Like the entire banking system and financial system that we know today in the analog world is built on top of gold. Like all those derivatives, everything, all that stuff is built on top of gold. Lightning enables like a genuine financial system built upon Bitcoin. But in terms of micropayments, that does bring me to Hailey, because a very fascinating, interesting thing that happened this week was the travel rule, like the FinCEN wanting to reduce it to $250. In a way, that's good for Bitcoin in that, like, it makes it the dollar system. Like, why are they shooting themselves in the foot? It seems so absurd. Like, what's the thinking behind here, and what do you think will happen?
Yeah. So
And what was this? I didn't hear this. I didn't follow this.
Okay, tell them what happened, Hailey.
Yeah, so the travel rule obviously comes from traditional banking, where you need to send specific information about one party from one financial institution to another. It's also been, recently solidified by FATF and FinCEN that it does apply in the crypto space. So I'll say that. But what Stacy's referring to is last week. Currently, it's at a certain threshold, and they're suggesting lowering it to $250 per transaction, which would be, that's like every transaction. And what's interesting is, like, in the traditional financial system, the travel rule works. Is it that perfect of a way to fight money laundering? No, I don't think so. But it works because it's pretty easy to figure out who's financial system A, who's financial system B, and they have a system to transfer that information. Lowering it, I do think, is shooting themselves in the foot. It's making the times in which a financial system needs to comply with that tenfold. But for the crypto space, it's been difficult because there is not a simple way to comply with the travel rule. There just isn't. And in the US, like, exchanges are having working groups and trying to figure out a way, like a SWIFT type network to comply, and for Coinbase to know how to send information to Gemini and vice versa. But for crypto companies, the regulation would apply to what they're calling VAS, VASPS. And that could really be a much broader group of companies that would need to be sending information back and forth. And the easiest way to get around this is to bring in your own wallet that's not connected to a VASP, and then the travel rule doesn't matter anyway. So, now that I'm not with an exchange, I can more openly say that, to me, the travel rule, especially in terms of the crypto space, is just, it doesn't do anything. Like, the people that want to get around the travel rule will.
It's like using credit cards with micropayments. Not to shit on you, Jim, but it's like stapling on the old system to a new technologically different system, and there's going to be growing pains for sure.
Yeah, and
I do want to talk. I do want to transition us to our last topic. We're kind of getting to the end of the show. I can see some sleepy eyes from the East Coasters. Our last topic is, will global citizens stand up against tyranny? The travel rule, many won't consider it tyranny, but many would say that it's definitely an overstep of power, that a lot of things that have been happening are to grow government, to restrict rights, to keep people within this walled garden. As this apparatus continues to grow, are people going to stand up? Are you bullish on Americans? Are you bullish on global citizens to kind of stand up and kind of try to maintain sovereignty? again, I haven't heard from Brady in a little bit. Let's go to Brady, then let's go to Stacy.
I mean, look, it's people are soft, man. Like, talk about the fourth turning, right? Brandon, my boy Brandon Clittum wrote this article. Neil Howe and William Davidson. I can't remember his name right now, but he's unfortunately passed. Wrote this book called The Fourth Turning, and in this cycle, good times create like weak, easy people, like people who kind of take it easy and are not so hard, and then that creates hard times, and hard times create hard people, and the cycle goes around. And I sort of feel like we've been like, even though we had 2008, and we had the 9/11 attacks, and we had a war. It was not anything like Vietnam. It wasn't anything like World War I or II. We're going through a pandemic right now, but I don't know. It doesn't feel like a massive challenge. We're all sort of in our little bubbles, in our pods, with our Netflix, with our whiskey, with our Zoom. There are people suffering for sure, but I don't know. It seems like we are at a point where the largesse has grown to a degree that has made us soft in general. And there are hard times coming. We can feel them, we can see them building, right? They accumulate. And I am skeptical that Americans have the wherewithal to really stand up to tyranny. I have not been emboldened or encouraged by reactions to, centralized actions, centralized powers, move toward tyrannical actions in this country. I hope that we can get our shit together and stand up for what is right, stand up for our privacy, stand up for our ability to, be free. And I think technologies like Bitcoin, empower us to do that in an easier way than it would otherwise be required, right? Like, it's not necessarily that we have to stand up for that physically in most cases. And that's great. I believe in unstoppable technologies. And so I think that as this next decade or two play out, we'll see the development of more technologies like Bitcoin that will empower people to, take their freedom into their own hands and defend it in a way that won't require us to put ourselves, I guess, I don't know, to overcome the cowardice that comes along with putting yourself in physical harm, in the way of physical harm. And I think that if that's the case, and we have those defensive tools and technologies, then I'm more optimistic than I would be otherwise in Americans' ability or like willingness to stand up to tyranny.
Right. I think by the way, before I go on, I want to mention that when we talk about Guy Fawkes, of course, the film with the Guy Fawkes mask is set around a virus that is released upon the people in order to control them and basically lock them down in the house. I'm sure there are people on YouTube that mentioned that at the beginning. I haven't seen it, but in terms of this global tyranny and whether Americans will stand up, first of all, I think I kind of see myself as a Bitcoiner now, and whenever I go to any Bitcoin conference anywhere in the world, I feel like way more in common with a Bitcoiner from Botswana than I do from, because you're an American, oh right, you're not a Bitcoiner, okay, but we live in the same town, hey, interesting, right? But I feel more connected to Bitcoiners. I feel like humans are like cockroaches, essentially. We survive everything. We survived Black Plague, the bubonic plague, Inquisition. We've survived a lot of stuff, and we keep on going. In the middle of the bubonic plague, in the middle of Inquisition, Da Vinci, Michelangelo are hanging out in Florence, like creating these masterpieces that survive for these thousands of years as masterpieces. It's like, I think there is always humans. There will always be humans that rise to whatever. They're like, whatever tyrannical system. There's always human ingenuity, and it always comes forward, and we always survive, and we always do the right thing at the end. And I think ultimately everything will be positive because we do have Bitcoin as kind of a, you know, as a, you know, a rail with, like, it's the underground railway of our modern era out of the fiat system.
Yeah, I think if I were to jump in, I would say, you know, you bring up a good point about, you know, kind of the fourth turning, and we kind of talk about that a lot in the Bitcoin space. But I would argue that, you know, Americans aren't bad at fighting tyranny at all. I think right now we're having an issue recognizing it and identifying it, in that, you know, we've lost like our ability to kind of interpret the world around us without the crutch of, you know, someone dictating to us what's going on. And like, you know, I don't know if I'm being kind of optimistic that we used to have that ability and don't anymore, but it definitely seems like it's not there. And I think if you know, if we were able to collectively understand where tyranny exists and understand, you know, if it's existing in our backyards, that we would, you know, raise up against it. But I just don't think that that apparatus kind of exists for us at the moment. That being said, you know, I don't believe that these turnings necessarily exist on like a generational or multi-generational level. Like I think it can turn very quickly. And so, you know, I'm optimistic from the standpoint that if things really got bad, that people would harden, and like, you know, the change that we need to have happen, like, would happen with the people that exist today. And so there's like my optimistic twist, but ultimately I'm kind of in agreement with both of you, Brady and Stacy, said.
And the one thing I would add, I mean, I started thinking about it, Brady, when you brought up 9/11. Like, there's this difficult balance, including in like the aspect of cryptocurrency that I focus on, of where the government uses something like 9/11 as justification for more surveillance, or something like COVID for more surveillance. And, you know, in certain ways, it's true. Like 9/11 was funded by terrorists using fiat and bank accounts in the US to fund that activity. Does that justify this like increased surveillance to where people doing the right thing are now under the microscope of the government? And something like Bitcoin does look interesting to libertarians, because we feel that we've been so under the microscope of the government. So I think part of the struggle, at least in my mind, is understanding when a government action is actually justified, or when things are being used to try to justify them. And that's when you push back. And I mean, part of what I love doing in the industry is trying to talk to the regulators and say, hey, this is a regulation you all felt was necessary for whatever reason, but this is why it doesn't work, or this is why it's stifling innovation. You know, that's a very like overused term these days. But so I think that that's part of it, is like, when I first joined the industry, I was of the mind of sort of rejecting the government and legal oversight that tries to come into the space. But there's a way in which I found that standing up to surveillance or freedoms being taken away sometimes is more educating. Not that that is the entire fight at all, but that's my baby step, I guess, in this space, is trying to say when something shouldn't be justified or isn't effective way of trying to do the right thing.
I mean, I think the nice thing about Bitcoin is that, and you know, these tools, is that it allows you to stand up to tyranny, but you don't have to be like, you know, brave, like, you know, Hong Kong protesters standing up to the government. You can just use the tools, or little things like, you know, drugs are illegal. Fuck that. I'm going to use drugs. I'm going to use BitTorrent. I'm going to use these tools. They're not huge risks. No one's going to come knocking on my door, but I'm just going to do it.
Exactly.
And, you know, things are unenforceable. Or, I mean, if Americans were told that they had to give up the guns, that the 300 million plus guns that are in the United States, I don't think they'd give them up. I don't think it would work. So yeah, I think Americans do stand up against tyranny.
Yeah, I think people are standing up now. I mean, look at the protests. Like, I took out a insane insurance policy on my home and all of my property, being less than a mile from the White House, because of it. Like, people are like, whether you agree with them or not, like, there are people who are standing up for, things that they think are heading in that direction. And I think Bitcoin for us is like a more logical, safer way to do that. But I think, like, when push comes to shove, like, like you said, if people came for guns, like, there would be like a huge outcry. So I mean, I think that's just like, I don't know, I think that's an inherent part of being an American, to be honest. Like, that's how it feels to me.
And for me, for some reason, there has always been more attention to free speech and right to bear arms. Like, this idea of like financial freedom, I think is one that, at least for me, was sort of a newer concept in law school. This idea of financial freedom it's not taught the same way as the First Amendment or other things. So I think that it's catching on, though. And I think that when, I don't know if you all have the same experience, but when I have conversations with lawyers or bankers or regulators who are sort of like, why did you choose that industry? What are you doing there? When you start to go down that rabbit hole of like financial freedom and not having surveillance and not having to like show everything you're doing in your bank account, it starts to click with people, like the same way that they want other freedoms and liberties.
Matt, you have to speak up.
The only
job,
productive
Stacy.
way forward is to empower individuals, and we should all focus on building, supporting, and using tools that do that. And I'm bullish on that being the case. I think those tools will be effective. I just think it'll be probably more painful than a lot of us expect in the medium term.
What an amazing last night of quarantine cocktails.
Yeah,
I feel a
drinks
little
in
bit
quarantine.
drunk.
So
Yeah,
Good job.
I've got
What's that, Des?
All right.
I said any sneak peek of what's next, what becomes of quarantine.
Just a better acronym.
It's not going to be Dick and Dick.
I've got kind of
Yeah.
a question. Maybe there's like kind of a final question of the night before we kind of go to sign-offs, which is, it feels like, especially with recent events on like, maybe we've sort of gotten past the war on terror, right? Like, we don't have the same, at least we, as of now, don't have the same sort of military actions going on. It seems like almost unofficially ended the war on drugs with like the ruling in Oregon. Like, what do you think the next war that America will wage is? And I want to hear some spicy takes. Who wants to go first?
War on trade, if it doesn't benefit us. That's what we've seen so far anyway. Who's
Crickets.
next?
No
I
one,
vote for
no one
Des.
cares.
Des, what's the next war? How about the war on some of your? How about if the government joins the war in mint gox, and like starts like killing your characters off?
Like, I start some like DLC betting on that stuff, man. Like, that's for sure. War on, I don't know. I just think we need more conspiracy theories, to be honest. Like, I miss me a good Pizzagate. Like, honestly, like, I need some good distractions. So.
I'm sure that there's gonna be plenty of conspiracies.
All the best conspiracy theorists have been deplatformed from all these social media. So you're missing it. That's what you're noticing.
I know. That's like, there needs to be maybe I need to start a platform for just conspiracy theories.
Well, to that point, my vote was going to be a war on misinformation. I think that's the way the government's going to try to start and private companies, I guess.
So just like China, they're going to act like China. Like in China, you can never find any information on Tiananmen Square. In America, you'll never be able to find information on Hunter Biden's laptop, or like certain topics will just be disappeared forever.
We might try to go that way. Hopefully we don't let it.
Encryption, 3D guns, and private money.
3D guns.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
I mean, we're already seeing the war on encryption.
We've been seeing that one for decades.
Exactly.
And the bastards keep getting reelected.
Look, I put my faith in unstoppable technologies. All right, we're in the age of exponential tech, and these things grow faster and faster. They build on top of each other, and we're going 3D guns, unstoppable. Bitcoin, unstoppable. Like, we will continue to develop protocols on top of the internet that will grow and expand and become stronger, and they will be unstoppable, and we will build the future on top of them. The base layers, like money is the base layer of civilization. We've got that done. Bitcoin. Defense is another basic layer of freedom and civilization. 3D printing, the free transmission of those archetypes, done. Like that. This is the beginning. We're building it now, and that's why there's such a massive transition. We're
just as soon as you can 3D print pharmaceuticals too. That'll be something.
Yeah, biohacking. There's all kinds of stuff. Like, I mean, all of this stuff is empowering the individual. The sovereign individual was right in a lot of respects. You can't get everything right when you're predicting 20, 30 years down the road, but man, it got so much right. And all of this tech is empowering the individual, and we're going to organize freely amongst ourselves, align with people who of like mind, of people who we like to associate with in the ways that we like to live, and that's the future that I see is people just gravitating toward each other and living in the ways they want to live. And if you don't want to live that way, go to another place and find people that like to live the way you live, and just be a lot more freedom, a lot more choice.
No, you have to live our way, especially on drinks in quarantine. You gotta live the Bitcoin way. Guys, thank you for coming onto the show. Thank you for syncing this DIQ and send her off for final dance. Let's go with our final word. We'll start off with Jim. Why don't you give your final word to the audience? Where can people find you? All that good stuff.
Well, thanks for inviting me to participate. You can find me at, my Twitter handle is just my name, Jim Epstein. You can also follow, all my work's at reason.com, Reason's YouTube channel. I guess that's it.
Seriously, watch the 4-part series. The history of cypherpunks is well worth knowing. Let's go over to you, Matt.
He's frozen.
Oh.
Matt's
Did you go to me? I was frozen for a second there. I was like,
Yes,
hopefully he goes
we went
to
to you.
anyone else in the chat. Thanks for having me.
Oh, he froze.
Oh man, I
No.
blew it. All right, let's go to Hailey.
Technology failed us.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It was really fun to chat with y'all tonight. I joined Anderson Kill last week, so I'm now a partner at that law firm if anyone's looking for any legal help. And on Twitter, I'm Hailey Lennon BTC. So thanks for joining us tonight, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.
All right, back to Matt. Try that again.
Thanks for having me. Buy Bitcoin. Sorry I froze.
All right. Next, Des.
Yeah, I am at Dickerson_does on Twitter, so you can follow me. My DMs are open. Always a spicy statement. But yeah, check out Lightning Labs. Check out our new product pool. Definitely get in, stack some sats that way, and join us for the next MintGox, like right after Thanksgiving. And like that's an awesome way to stack sats too. So yeah.
Des, I heard a really great conspiracy theory for you to look up just like last week. It's that the Titanic never actually sank, and it was a sister ship that sank instead for insurance money. So check it out. It blew my mind when I read it.
I love it. I honestly love it. Like, I'm gonna probably. I was planning on going to bed now. I'm gonna be up till 4 a.m. So thank you. Thank you.
All right. Down the Titanic rabbit hole. All right, Brady, let's go to you, and then let's close it out with Stacy.
Oh yeah.
All right. Hey, thanks everyone. This is a lot of fun. I always love drinks in quarantine. Matt, congratulations to you for keeping up with me. I know you started 7 hours before me. I got through a quarter bottle of this Talisker. I think you kept right up with me. I saw you not like filling up every time I did, which is hilarious. If you guys had fun tonight, tomorrow, Swan Lounge, Matt's going to be on with us along with American Hodl and Peter McCormick. We're going to talk about their bet between Biden and Trump, and that's going to be fun because, hell, we don't even know who's won yet. There will be more whiskey consumed. That's it. That's all I got. Thank you, CK.
Of course, if you're watching this and you're wanting to join Bitcoin Nation, start stacking sats at swanbitcoin.com/max.
There you go.
Use my affiliate link. And I'm kind of like pushing people to our Telegram group instead of Twitter because I don't know how Twitter will survive like during this civil war that Rachel Maddow is hoping for in America. So I have this Telegram group with this really handsome guy called Max Keiser, and it's Orange Pill. Like, go to Orange Pill on Telegram, and that's where we're hanging out. We have 4,683 members, and they're all watching right now. So hi Orange Pill group.
Orange Pill
What
for the
up,
win.
fam?
I love Orange Pill. Y'all are doing amazing work. And that
Oh,
friggin' song, I can't get it out of my head, Stacy. Like, come on.
Sean Lennon, right? Like creating the theme tune for a Bitcoin show. Like, how cool is that, right?
It's just so stuck in my head. Like every morning I wake up and it's in my head.
Man, we should have had it queued up to close out the show. That would have been awesome. All right, guys. Well, again, thank you to the panel for coming on. I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening. For everyone watching, we'll be back next Thursday with a new brand and a new name. So, again, we're going to keep doing the same thing. But, yeah, thank you very much. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to like. Make sure to go to BitcoinBlackFriday.com. Get your fold card. Enter to win one whole Bitcoin. All that good stuff. But, yeah. I'm going to close this one out, y'all. Peace.
Bye, guys.
Right. Bye, Bitcoin.